Captain Bristle was a Scottish sea captain, but this captain didn't have a ship to sail or a crew to command, and this made him sad. Captain Bristle lived in a wee house on a tall hill, and one night from his window he saw a shooting star and he wished for a ship. The very next day he received a letter giving him command of HMS Shipshape, a brand new ship built in the city of Glasgow. Excited, Captain Bristle began to pack. He packed his captain's uniform, he packed his raincoat, he packed his wellies, he packed his sou'wester, he packed his telescope, and he packed his trusty compass. Captain Bristle loved Scotland, but he always missed it so much on his travels. For a moment his heart felt heavy. Then he had a big idea. He walked out of the back door of his wee house, across his garden and into the shed. A few minutes later he emerged clutching a large sack and began the long walk up the path that led to the top of the tallest hill. He stopped at a thistle patch, reached into his bag, pulled out a trowel and a plant pot and began to dig. He carefully filled the plant pot with soil, and one by one he planted as many freshly picked thistles as the pot could fit. Captain Bristle walked back to his wee house. He placed the pot in his captain's trunk and set off for King's Docks in the River Clyde to board his new ship, HMS Shipshape. On the bridge, Captain Bristle inspected his maps and began charting his journey across the Commonwealth. First, he was to sail across the Atlantic Ocean to the snow and ice of Nova Scotia in Canada. From there, he would take Shipshape south to the warmth of Bermuda, Jamaica and the Caribbean islands, onto Nigeria and then down to South Africa. He would round the Cape of Good Hope and sail her back up the coast to Kenya before crossing the Arabian Sea to India and Sri Lanka. Shipshape would visit Singapore, Australia and the Oceanic Islands, then head for home by Cape Horn and the Falkland Islands, and the last stop, the Rock of Gibraltar. It would be a long voyage, but Captain Bristle was very excited. He was looking forward to all the places he would visit and leaving a small piece of Scotland everywhere he went. As HMS Shipshape docked in Nova Scotia, cargo was loaded and unloaded and passengers came and went. He wandered off through the busy port and into the frozen countryside. At the edge of a deep blue lake, he found an ideal spot. He dug a small hole in the earth and lovingly planted just one thistle from the pot of thistles he had packed so carefully back in Scotland. He gently watered it from his own drinking bottle and then stepped back to admire the breathtaking views. And at each destination, Captain Bristle did the same thing, until every port had been visited, and it was time for HMS Shipshape to begin her return journey home to Glasgow. She sailed past England, she sailed past Wales, she sailed past the Isle of Man, and then Captain Bristle steered HMS Shipshape past the Isle of Arran into the mouth of the River Clyde. HMS Shipshape came to a gentle stop alongside King's Dock. Back at his wee house on the tall hill, Captain Bristle began to unpack. He opened his captain's trunk, and sat on top of his luggage was the pot, containing one last small thistle. Captain Bristle knew that this was a very special thistle. He smiled a big smile and said, "Hello there, wee thistle. I shall call you Clyde." He went into his front garden and planted Clyde, pride of place, in the centre of his lawn. That night, Clyde stood alone in the front garden, and as he looked up at the starry night sky, he began to remember all of the amazing sports that he'd seen people training for in his adventures across the Commonwealth. Swimmers in Canada training with salmon in freezing lakes. Powerful weightlifters in Nauru. Quick-footed wrestlers in India and fast cyclists in Australia. The most amazing sprinters in Jamaica and speedy table tennis stars in Singapore. Suddenly, Clyde saw a shooting star and made a very special wish all of his own. And then something magical happened. Day after day, night after night, Clyde began to grow. He grew so much that one day Clyde summoned up all of his strength and pulled at his legs rooted firmly in the soil. He pulled and he pulled until each leg popped free. Standing on his own 2 feet, he looked down towards Glasgow. He was beaming with excitement and knew he had a very, very important job to do. The Commonwealth Games were coming to Glasgow, and Clyde had to tell everyone all about them. There was no time to waste.
While the rain is setting, and all the time